everybody has an idea. They've heard that I've used the term cryptozoologist, meaning looking for new life forms. I have to let you all know everybody here is basically a cryptozoologist, okay? And that's only because there is no field of cryptozoology per se. I mean, you can teach yourself as much as you can about biological sciences, but if you're somebody thinking about extraterrestrial life, if it's not human, we're talking about something that actually technically falls under the term of cryptoterrestriology. In other words, hidden beings or animals that live on this planet with us. And we'll get into that a little bit tonight. Just keep in mind, we've only discovered 15% of life on Earth. That means that out of every 100 animals, there's 85 of them running around that we've never seen and never cataloged and never put on a tray or sliced up or anything like that. So while most of this is going to be insect life and smaller ocean life, once in a while we do run across animals that just really startle us and really kind of take science by the neck and slap it around a bit, which is, we all enjoy that when scientists get proven wrong. They don't enjoy it so much, but it's part of the evolution of science. I leave this up here in the very beginning of the talk. This is basically the statistics that came out a number of years ago, telling everybody that if you're interested in paranormal or unusual subjects, you tend to have a higher degree of education than most people that don't. And this has actually been statistically proven. So while people are out there constantly telling you that you're living on the fringe or you're not in touch with reality, it's actually you're on the leading edge of reality. And those people who are telling you that are afraid to step forward where you are today. We can go to the next slide. So today's talk, we're going to talk about the past, present, and future implications of contact with reptilian humanoids. But more so than that, there's other things that I'll address today, which includes some of the information that I've been privy to through the years, having to do with the South Bay area of Torrance and Redondo Beach and Palos Verdes, and how this is actually the capital of all of that you think of ufology is actually nestled in that area right down there. We're talking about magic command headquarters, that type of thing. A lot of the R&D, research and development that gets back engineered is taking place right down the street from here. And hence, I think that it might be a very good reason why the skies overhead in World War II were being challenged by a foreign power by flying their objects directly over our most sensitive facilities here on the West Coast, which turned into the battle over Los Angeles. If you notice, they didn't go flying over Camp Pendleton or other military installations. They actually flew down around, going up towards Point Doom and the Santa Monica Mountains there, and they headed south and actually directly flew over Torrance and Redondo Beach and Palos Verdes before heading back down towards Long Beach and heading back out. So you have to ask yourself, what are they so interested in down there that they would have to want to make a presence? And it is actually because our leading edge of science and industry that has to do with back engineering a lot of the technologies that are possibly retrieved from alien crashes or lost civilizations, from finding them through archaeological means. Those objects are actually taken down there and they're back engineered right in, basically in our own back door here. So it's kind of fantastic to think that you're in Los Angeles and some of the most hidden stuff is right underneath your feet down by the beach cities. I happen to know some of this for many years. My mother worked for aerospace. She ended up being the senior technical editor for the Raytheon newsletter. So she was probably one of the people that came up, and even though she's an artist, she fit in with engineers and scientists, and she was awarded that position for her technical skills and her language capabilities. I can tell you right now, I take a little bit of pleasure, and this is the first time I've mentioned it, but actually the reason that they have a 4-day work week on the test site was due to a conversation I had with my mother many years ago, which the Department of Defense and companies up in Nevada actually took and tested, and they found out it produced productivity amongst their employees working on the test range. They moved to a 4-day work week. And my thinking at the time was that was just the best option to have for any job. And so I did, through a number of years, meet a lot of individuals who were working on secret work. And because I was the offspring, I'm the son of people that were in those fields, of course I had my ears open, and I met a lot of their kids. And there's many of their children didn't have the technical skills that their parents did, and they were more artists or actors or musicians, and they didn't quite fit in. But there's a lot of them out there, and I'm telling you that right now, that actually have a lot of information, because one of the interesting things about intelligence is that when you're in the intelligence family, you're basically in the family. And we'll talk about some of that tonight. I have a friend of mine whose father worked in the electronics industry, very top secret work, and even though he wasn't cleared, it was okay for him to be around unless the general was around, because all of the other people looked at them just like they were family members. So there was a lot of things heard and a lot of things discovered. And right here in Torrance specifically, and Redondo Beach, and this area right in here, we have some of the deepest networks of underground tunnels and underground bases you can ever possibly imagine. And it really hasn't been talked about in ufology. They're talking about all these other areas where UFOs appear. Why do you think they're happening off the coastline here? We're going to get into that. Let's take the next picture. I'm going to roll through this faster. He was... And I'll say that for the benefit, I'll repeat it up here with the mic. Somebody in the audience, and I can't see who made the statement out there, had made the comment that El Segundo was one of the highest tax bases around here, and that's because their incomes are so high. It's true. On the surface in the Torrance and Redondo area, years ago, there were companies that manufactured R&D for the military-industrial complex, but actually what they did is they moved underground and they built neighborhoods on top for their employees to live in. Some of these are gated communities, so they basically just don't even have to leave the community in the morning. They just go downstairs to work. So, and this is my title 17, because I'm going to use clips in here. Go ahead. So we're going to talk about the past, present, and future, and what does this actually mean to us when it comes to contact with reptilian humanoids specifically. But of course, we're talking about a higher civilization, no matter what species it would be. I'm just going to focus on the reptilian humanoids tonight because a lot of you have heard a lot of crazy stories, and there's like 80% of crazy stories out there amongst people. And I'm going to bring you the 20% that actually has helped ufology reach its 4% maximum saturation, or I wouldn't say maximum, saturation at this point. That's 12.5 million Americans believe in reptilian humanoids at this point. And I remember years ago, and some of the people are in the room here that had seen some of my earlier talks back in the 1990s when nobody was talking about this. They were like, what are you talking about? They just didn't quite get it. And it's interesting, though, as even open-minded as we were still closed-minded because we still had the mindset of the Nordic blondes and the little gray beings. This other thing that had some sort of a reptilian character to it was so foreign to us, it was difficult for us to even accept it in as one of the newly discovered species that shares our planet. So you see how we are? We're open-minded, yet we're shut down. Our perceptions are a little changed too. And I'll answer your question, but let's hold questions until the end. If you can write them down on a little piece of paper, we'll make sure you have time. But go ahead for now. What would you like to know? The reptilians, I was just being shared, and for those of you who may not have heard, many years ago, I had somebody here in the audience that had done makeup for a cable show that I was on, and to her, from her perspective, this was so far out there, it just hadn't been heard before. And I appreciate you coming forward and saying that. I don't, a long time ago, I felt really lonely. I've had UFO conference organizers blackball me because they said that nobody wanted to hear about reptilian humanoids. And right. Right, and that's one of the reasons why in the very beginning when I started sharing the research, I didn't charge for it or anything. I wasn't charging any money. I was typing up reports and photocopying them and then just sending them out for free. And a lot of this was done just freely sending it out. And of course that started multiplying itself exponentially, and it went out and it did reach a large audience. The thing is that one of the main things that I have been focusing on over the years is drawing everybody's attention back down to our planet, because I really believe this is part of the psychological control that we're under by our leaders. Since Kenneth Arnold saw those flying wings and skipping over the mountains there, ever since that time, our attention has been directed up towards the skies and outer space. Before then, for a long time, 100 and so years, when we were thinking about other beings and other entities, they were coming from underneath our feet. They were coming from caverns, and they were lost civilizations. There were many generations of your relatives a long time ago that were brought up just like science fiction. This was their reading. This is where they were getting their reports. The idea of something coming from off our planet was left to, H.G. Wells scaring us about something to do with Mars. But actually, it's much easier to research this phenomenon when you pull your eyes back down onto the planet. They want us to be looking off planet because then we have to rely on scientists and people who have security clearances and whose incomes are based on all their federal funding in order for us to get the information. We're not going to get the information as long as those people's financial lifelines are locked into their secrecy. It doesn't work that way. However, if you start recognizing that a long time ago, possibly, that something came here, even if there was 1,000 years between then and now, they would consider themselves as sentient, more so than you perhaps, and they would think of themselves as more Terrans than even you, because it's not been so recently we've gathered together as a civilization. So really, whose planet is this? Is it are these the creatures' planet? They landed here 1 million years ago and it's theirs? Well, maybe somebody had it before them. So this idea of whose planet is it, we've got to get over this isolationist type of thinking that we think it's just our planet. It's not. As a matter of fact, we may just be so low down as far as who thinks they own the planet that we're just the fodder in a battle that's been waged for many years of secrecy and also manipulation and control. So we're going to be talking about the past. We're going to talk about the present, what's going on here at the present, and we're going to talk a little bit about what the future could hold for us. Go ahead. And we can go ahead. So in the past, one of the things that really cued me into realizing there was something to do with the reptilians here on this planet was one of the overlooked aspects of the crash at Roswell. When the crash at Roswell took place, they said that the reports coming out said that the beings had beaded skin like a lizard. Okay, don't forget that. George Norrie, he loves that now. He knows it's true and he repeats it all the time. They had beaded skin as a lizard. Okay, and on their fingertips, go ahead. This is Glenn Dennis. Glenn Dennis, who was the mortician at the time in Roswell, who got the small caskets to bring them out to the airbase. His friend of his was the nurse that attended an autopsy out on the base, and she had told him that the small fingers on these creatures, go ahead, the small fingers on the creatures looked like they had little circular tips or pads on their fingers. And see, I had enough education to say, well, wait a minute, that's kind of like an arboreal lizard. I mean, we've talked about the skin being beaded like a lizard, but now there are tree lizards called, and there are arboreal lizards, I mean tree lizards, but really their hands are a little different. Go ahead. They have these little barbs on them, and sometimes the geckos and smaller lizards, these barbs can be circular like little pads. And what they are is they're not suction cups, they're just tiny microscopic little hooks, and they'll hook into anything that's even tinier than the human eye can see. And so we have the physical appearance of these beings pointed to a terrestrial origin more than an extraterrestrial origin. Immediately, because we know that we have animals like that on our planet. But see, the government wasn't lying to us. They never, they've lied to us. In terms of when they kept saying afterwards, we have no extraterrestrial threat that we're aware of, they could have had a good lawyer tell them, well, you can say that because the threat may not be perceived as extraterrestrial, it may be terrestrial. But a good lawyer knows that that's giving one of those answers that may be misconstrued, and that's what they did. So they've been trying to keep our eyes off the planet. 1/2000th of the Earth's surface has a cave or a natural opening into the Earth. And only recently, 1988, they made it illegal for anybody to go into a cave without a federal cave permit or a federal cave inspector accompanying them. And Bonnie Crystal, who's a scientist, I don't have her picture here today, but I've been on TV shows with her. She was a cave scientist, and she developed long-range communications inside caves. And she actually, with some colleagues of hers, went down to Mexico, and they were 400 feet deep in a cave, and they found tracks from a lizard that was walking upright. There was no sign that its tail was being dragged in the mud. It was an underground river. They found the tracks along an underground river. They estimate it to be about 33 kilograms in size, which is relatively small. But when you're talking about a small reptile walking upright on two legs 400 feet under the ground in Mexico, it makes you wonder, well, could it have relatives, and could they be smarter? And could this be the reason there's so much UFO activity down in Mexico? Were they told something by the ancients a long time ago about somebody coming back here that somehow maybe just like we did a long time ago, they assumed they donned the costumes of feathers and snake skins because they were naturally drawn to it? We don't know, but what we do know is that these beings have been seen down there. In addition to that, England a number of years ago got a very nasty international incident where they had cavers that had gone down there into Mexico, and they were in a cave and got stuck. And the problem with it, with the event, was that not only did they have to have other professional military cavers come in, but it turns out that these British cavers were all military, and they were all in the country doing this without telling the Mexican government. Okay, so they were exploring the caves under Mexico without any kind of permission. They didn't want the Mexican government to know. And I believe it's because reports like this that Bonnie Crystal came out saying that she found these bipedal foot tracks. There's UFO activity taking place from the heart of Mexico. I think other governments are very concerned about that as well, and going around about their own ways to try and explore and find the same answers that we are. Of course, I think they know a lot more than we do now. Go ahead. So other evidence that came up a long time ago that really took my attention was the fact that Leonard Woolley, the archaeologist a number of years ago, when he was exploring Ur, the city of Ur, go ahead, he discovered the statuettes that looked like little reptilian humanoids with cone heads. And the interesting thing was that even though that they were reptiles, go ahead, you see the one on the left here, it was pictures of holding a small little dinosaur to the breast. Now, most reptiles I know don't have breasts or teats. It's not the reptilian thing. So it does definitely show some sort of hybridization taking place, because snakes don't mother their children in such a way like that. Although they did find out more so recently than they had in the past that, yes, reptiles are actually caretakers of their children as well. They don't just lay their eggs and run away. Go ahead. So we have these creatures in our past coming up through the history records. I could go on for hours here tonight, as some other speakers may, talking about the names of Roman gods and what they did and how they were all connected with the serpent and the dragon. But to tell you the truth, at this point, that information is so peripheral, it's not entertaining to me as far as my intellect, because yes, I know it's all due on historical record, which means that there's going to be aspects of human psychology blended in with real accounts. We know that the iconography of serpents and dragons wasn't used throughout history because people said, I have a friend who's a reptilian humanoid and I'm going to use this as my banner. They didn't do that. what they did is they recognized something very, very powerful about the snake and the serpent. And through listening to their witch doctors or shamans, or even by practical experience, they found out when you loosen the mind through through using drugs, mind-altering drugs, that one of the most common images that comes up to you is that of a serpent. As a matter of fact, I was told by a number of years ago, this shows I'm getting old, Terence McKenna, I was remembering his name, Terence McKenna contacted me, and we were talking back and forth, and I was asking him about, Terence, you've taken so many mind-altering drugs. Can you tell me, have you ever seen a reptilian humanoid? And Terence had told me that he did. It was one time, and he said it was one of the most powerful experiences he's ever had. And he just did not know if it was emanating from his own mind or at that time and space whether he had something actually standing in front of him. Okay? So we have all of this history from before. We were told about the Garden of Eden with the serpent in the garden. Very few people are aware of the fact that the older documentation actually says that the serpent walked upright, had arms and legs like a man, and walked in the garden and talked to Adam and Eve. Of course, years later, they started the version King James. It's my version. I can do what I want. I'll write what I want. He went in there and said, oh, we don't have to say it had legs. We don't have to say it had arms. We'll just say it had a snake. You know, they were taking out all of the things that we recognize today, going, aha, that sounds like a humanoid. They were taking all of those out because it was so abstract to them, they couldn't figure it out, so they just simplified it. That doesn't mean that they were all in communication with these beings. No, it just means this is a learning process for a lot of our leadership. There's only a very few people who are actually in contact with reptilian humanoids. However, they hear what we talk about on TV and everything, and just as normal society grows, stories get shared, and of course the leaders get blamed. And really what it did was a discredit to ufology and also human consciousness, was to take the idea of a sentient reptilian being and then hear nothing but telling you that you're victims to their being evil and that they're here to do everything wrong. And it's just not that way. You know, maybe their military would like you to think that, but they're not that way. If this is their planet, this seems to be not a great planet, but that's because of the decision-making of our own leadership. It doesn't necessarily mean that somebody else told them to behave that way. And I personally believe that if there's a higher consciousness out there, they're sitting there and they've got their chin on their hand like this, and they're wondering, when are they going to take full responsibility for their own actions? Because that's part of the evolution of a human society. Not blaming everything that goes wrong on something else because why? It sounds good, because it sounds evil. It fits in with our religious indoctrine, so we're just to go for it. I feel very bad for the reptilian humanoids who are here, who would love to have peaceful negotiations with us, send their artists and their children up so we can see what they're like, and enjoy some of their culture and get into a cross-cultural and business exchange with them, because that's in our future now. I'm telling you that, whether we're alive or not, somewhere along the lines here, our children's children or grandchildren, or who knows, maybe even sooner than that, we'll have an opportunity to open up negotiations and start exchanges like we would any other country. It's bound to happen. We can't stay perceived enemies and unknown partners forever. Okay, go ahead. So all of these ancient depictions showed them with the arms and the legs, and we just seem to bypass that. You don't want to ask these questions in church. Go ahead. We were all used to a long time ago to the little gray alien image. It didn't seem like it was threatening. Yeah, I could kick its butt. You know, if it came to me in the middle of the night and told me to get in its ship, boy, I could just kick that thing around, you know. And that was the feeling we got next. And, of course, then we had the same image presented to us a little differently when Spielberg got in. But remember, the bodies on the Roswell crash, even though they were said to have beaded skin like a lizard and these little suction cups, there's been descriptions of them being humanoid enough to where they could say that their skin looked brown and leathery at times. And so that's why I included this wonderful picture, but it just kind of reminds me of the little brown grays, I think they used to call them, the long-nosed browns, or brown long-nosed grays. Go ahead. And so we had this was the image. It had just not, we had just not incorporated the next one yet. Go ahead. So basically, we're talking about a being that could be anywhere from 6.5 to 7.5 feet tall, maybe up towards of 8 foot tall. They have a lot of physical things like we do, although they're very different in ways as well. They don't have the horns sticking out all over the place like has been depicted. They do or don't have tails. They don't have any facial hair or anything. Their ears are either non-existent or just small slits off to the side of their head. The nose is either flat or hardly just but 2 openings. And the rest of their body is like ours, with the exception of they've got very good physical prowess about them. They're very strong. And they have 3 fingers with an opposing thumb as opposed to 5 fingers. And go ahead. We've been looking at them and also taking into consideration that their skulls were originally reported as being somewhat elongated and sloped backwards. Now, this does fit in with the ancient depictions that we've seen, as well as the common interest right now in the elongated skulls that have been found and the documentation and the scientific analysis they've been going through recently. Go ahead. So, I think from our perspective, it looks like as these beings retreated back underground years ago, the humans that were on the surface that remembered them remembered their slightly back-sloping and cone-shaped head. Go ahead. Much like the depictions of what's been said to be on the back of like a mountain gorilla or a Bigfoot. So it's not such a cone head as remember from Dan Aykroyd in Saturday Night Live. It's smaller, definitely, but it's definitely there. Go ahead. Now, one of the things that really made me realize that I was on track is when I found out about the work of Dale Russell. Dale Russell is a very famous paleontologist. You see him on TV a lot. He basically did a report, go ahead, for NASA. NASA commissioned him to do it based on extraterrestrial life. And when he was working up at the museum in Ottawa, he and a colleague had gotten together, and based on what they had seen the dinosaurs going through physically as they were changing over the years, their morphological changes, they had a look and said, well, if it hadn't died out, what would it look like today? Go ahead. And so they came up with this model. And this model, to me, was striking. It was so striking, when I found out about it, I tracked down and called Dale, and I had years of communications with him, and eventually it waned off because he didn't like to be associated with an idea that he brought forward in a thought experiment, which is what would happen if they had been allowed to survive, what would they look like today? And because it fit the parameters of what we were discussing in ufology in modern society, as well as what we had seen in ancient history with some of the depictions, this seemed to be something that sandwiched it from both ends and sealed it for me, and I realized I was onto something. Especially when Dale told me that he advised me not to move forward in this exploration because he said it would be it would not, how do you say it? He said it would be professionally, it would be better to my economics as a professional looking in this area if I did not pursue it. In other words, I would have trouble as a scientist if I decided I wanted to go forward into the field of biology and science. If I was starting to espouse this, he was telling me to be careful and don't do that, because he knew that he had received blowback from it, which means negative kind of ramifications from your peers. And he had to endure that, so he didn't want this to, rise up again. But now he's been invited on so many television shows, he's often denying any appearances because he doesn't want to go any further on it. Go ahead. Now, this is Dale Russell's name, and this model is not something that's just for ufology. As a matter of fact, Frank Drake and the guys at Los Alamos Labs, the leading scientists, they had a fellow colloquium in 1988 talking about extraterrestrial life. And when they did, they brought up Dale Russell's ideas of an advanced dinosaur. Next slide. And for those of you who can't read, I'm going to read this for you. It says, if the Sauronithzoids had another 10 or 20 million years, it could well have been the first intelligent creature on Earth. Your mommy and daddy, your spouse, your girlfriend and boyfriend would have looked like the creature in Figure 2. We would have to redesign the furniture, and we'd have to be looking forward to a dinner of vermin. It says the Sornithinoids are also an example of creatures that could have led a very weird species of intelligent life on Earth, although an intelligent species can probably be much weirder depending on who wins the evolutionary race. Regardless, now we now expect intelligence to be capable of arising over and over again on a planet. You hear that? Okay, we have life here, but they're trying to say we're the only life, and then at the same time they say, wait a minute, life and intelligence in life rises up over and over again. So that means by their own statement that we're most likely right. There's other intelligent beings on our planet, and they're just hiding from us or being hidden from us. Go ahead. Now, I think this has got a next clip. And don't tap it yet. This is a video clip. I've just assembled some of these clips through the years talking about reptilian humanoids. There's some of Dale Russell in here, so you can see it. This is some of the back science that you might be interested in to see what we know about it. Instead of just saying reptilian aliens, you'll have a little knowledge now about that. And also, I think we have some clips towards the end here that have to do with the media. And before we see it, and you can look forward to it on the back end of this might be like 15 minutes long. But on the back end of it, what I'm showing you, and I won't have time to stop it because it's a PowerPoint, you don't have that stop-go type thing. But when you look at it, what I did was, down in Bishopville in 1988, they had a sighting of a reptilian humanoid, the lizard man, and it galvanized the whole community. Everybody got together, people coming in from out of state, thousands of people. The sheriff down there at the time was Liston Truesdale, a friend of mine, and he said it just went crazy. Everybody was out there with shotguns and dogs. They wanted to go kill these things and bring them back so they can show the world, and it just turned into a dangerous environment. But the interesting thing about it is that CBS and NBC and ABC News sent news crews down there. Now, the one clip that I've pulled from you is Peter Van Sant, and you'll recognize him if you're of our generation. He was a reporter, and he's investigating down there, and he does something that reporters are not supposed to do, which is when he's telling you the story, you'll see it there, he's saying, now, he's cueing an audience visually. He's going, now, is anything happening down here that is unusual, that there's some sort of normal explanation for it? These people are actually meeting creatures, out here? Or is everybody just kind of running off the board and everybody's kind of going crazy doing this? Now, you'll see him doing this to you. This is a major news network trying to cue the American population to calm down, that there's nothing to see here, move along. And you don't do that. I worked with television and news. You don't ever shake your head in any kind of way to try and lead an audience member into doing anything. It's just not right. It's unethical. So for him to do that on major news was a big thing. So sit back, relax, enjoy these few minutes here, and we'll go ahead and play that. Or maybe not. Slide behind. When we switched out PowerPoint presentations, could that have reset it? Can we pause for a minute? It's your laptop. Can you work it for us?
Earl of Clancarty, member of the British House of Lords, also suggested that aliens might be living beneath our feet.
You can watch this clip too.
This is from outer space, and I think that at some time there were some very ancient civilizations here, and possibly during a time when there was a catastrophe, they went inside, because there's an enormous number of tunnel systems all around the Earth.
Your Lordship, how would you react to accusations that you're dotty and eccentric?
Well, I think the answer to that is that very often the people whom one regards as slightly dotty because they've come up with some original ideas very often turn out to be right.
I forgot I had that in there. That was the Earl of Clancarty. He was a British Earl in England, and he had he was of extremely high standing over in England. Yet he was one of the proponents behind the idea that advanced civilizations had taken up occupation of the underside of our planet, inside caves and caverns. And he was trying to let everybody know this. He was one individual, along with two others on the same day, that were inducted into the original Hollow Earth Society that's no longer in existence. As we can see here from the clips, basically you have a little bit more of a broad understanding of the science that actually backs it up. In the field of ufology, do we have any other scientists that are even willing to back up anything we're willing to say about it? How a gray could evolve or grow up or look that way? Nothing. This is the one area of ufology that actually has more science backing it up than anything else. Yet this is the one area of research, as well as research into the underground, that has caused myself and other colleagues from the earliest stages to have contacts with the men in black. Okay? There was a timing for everything. And with the Hollow Earth and the underground bases, that's still an issue we're ongoing today, because with the Department of Homeland Security, like there was 15, 20 years ago, you could walk around and take pictures and investigate things. You really can't do that anymore, because otherwise you're now perceived as a threat. But back then, we were having people come up with these accounts and letting us know this. Now that we have a little bit more of an understanding of how such a being could actually evolve, see, it lends a little more room to our discussion. When you're talking about people about UFOs or alien beings, if you're talking about them in terms of extraterrestrial origin, there's so many arguments that can be put up to your discussion that usually other people who aren't ufologists will close down their hearing. They'll hit that total saturation point of where ours will wander away from you because they can't handle anymore. Okay? Aliens does not mean off-planet. Aliens just means different from us. And when it came to talking about creatures who had been here for a long time and who might be considering this home, it means that we have neighbors, not foreign invaders. And if we can go to the next slide. After seeing these kind of things, what put me on is that I started the website at reptoids.com back in, I think, 97, earlier part of 98. And the reason for doing that is because, go ahead, I had a contactor survey up there which was like 55 questions in which I was asking individuals about their reptilian humanoid contacts. So for about 2 or 3 years, the survey stood on the website and I collected the reports of everybody coming in. And of course, I couldn't contact everybody. Some people would leave a phone number and others wouldn't. But it allowed me to get my fingers on the pulse of the American public about what was happening out there. And it was around, maybe a little bit earlier than this, but around the same time, I decided in my life that that was going to be my life. I had plans to get into theater and acting. I was an actor in New York City. I did Miami Vice shows and things like that, and The Equalizer, and just silly stuff. But it wasn't until afterwards I started realizing this was my passion. And I did literally become the crypto hunter. Okay? I went out there, and when I heard of something mysterious going on, I would quit my job and go move somewhere so I could get another job nearby so I can put my ear to the ground to hear what it was all about. And this has been very beneficial. Of course, it doesn't give you much of a work history because you're constantly changing jobs and going places, but one of the things it does is it gives you insight. For example, off subject here, a number of years ago, almost 11 years ago, I got married up in Hamilton, Montana. And I knew something was going on in Hamilton, Montana. It's one of only, I think, 8 places in the United States where they carry the most deadliest bioweapons, and they manufacture them there and experiment with them there. And it's a little town in western Montana. It's kind of like Sunnyvale or something when you see Virus, the little town that was willing to get nuked because it was kind of like they knew the risk they had. But when I was there, I ended up going down and getting a job in dispatch with the police department. And of course, late one night, because the dispatchers know everything, I was sitting there like 2 in the morning and getting bored, and I said, what is this craziest thing? I'd never told anybody why I was getting a job there, of course. I said, what's the craziest thing you've ever heard? And she goes, oh yeah, well, we had this case in which there was a detective, and he called into dispatch, and there was he did the route where they did around a lake about maybe 2 or 3 miles away from the town, to see if the teenagers were out there drinking, doing drugs, necking, whatever it is, around the lake. And when he was coming to his full circle around the lake, he called in the report, and he actually had a craft that was about 30 feet in diameter hovering above him, only feet away over the lake. And I said, really? And she goes, yeah. And she says, what's really wild is you could hear it. And I said, what do you mean hear it? Oh, we had the recordings of this. There was like 15 minutes where you could hear the saucer in the background, and he was describing it, and you could hear everything going on. And I said, well, can I hear the tape? Oh, no, that was taken out of the dispatch office. I said, where'd it go? Oh, that was taken up to the city attorney's office. The city attorney's office? Oh, yeah, he has it in his safe now. I said, really? And he goes, yeah, well, that detective is now a judge. And so if a judge gets accused of calling in reports like this, it puts all of his decisions to question. So they were politically protecting him by hiding the tape. And when my wife and I got married, it was so strange. It was supposed to be another judge that couldn't make it at the last minute, and all of a sudden the judge that had the experience comes walking down the hallway, and I'm like, look at this guy. We were laughing during our wedding because he was standing right between us, but we hadn't had a chance to talk to him yet about his experience. So going to places, putting yourself into situations in which you can meet people is part of what I do, and it's not the luxury that most people have, because most people have to work a job and stay there for their families. My life hasn't been like that. It's been one of sacrifice. I never had children or anything like that, but that was considered something that would tie me down or get in the way. I was also told at a younger age that that's what the government would use against you to shut you up, because they would threaten to hurt your children. And of course that managed to work on many people. There's some older characters out there in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, and I've met some of them, and they're really wonderful, and they were you and I many years ago. But after being burned out on it and not seeing much progress, more of them fell off to the wayside, so they don't really come forward and go to the meetings. But they listen to what you're talking about, and all of them are appreciative that something's happening, and there's some forward movement here. So we'll go ahead with that. So the website went through evolutionary changes of its own. Go ahead. And I've always tried to take a lighter approach to this. I've done a lot of television shows that were comedy shows in which people were set up to say things, and of course there would be a comedian on the TV and he'd make fun of you. And Kevin Nealon had a show, Conspiracy Zone. We did a couple of those, and we'll talk about those in a minute. Go ahead. And go ahead. And where we are now. And the main reason I started putting more passive characters of reptilian humanoids on the websites, because we've heard so much out there about they're evil, they're going to take your baby, they're all, you know, they're sexually molesting people or raping them. All of this fodder, and I'm using that term carefully, is out there, and it's really causing injury to the subject matter, because it doesn't deserve that. But only a few individuals have gone out there and pushed that around. It does it a great disservice. Go ahead. So in the present time where we're at, we have individuals who are identifying with we are their victims, and Earth are their victims, or the reptiles are going to be our holy saviors. And I would say it's probably not either, because even the Holy Savior comes here in some terms like Arthur C. Clarke's book, Childhood's End, written in 1952, I think it was. And this was his first book. You all know him as the guy that invented the satellite and everything in 2010. He also worked early radar during World War II. He was approached by somebody, I believe, to write Childhood's End, which was a book about some reptilian humanoids returning to Earth, claiming Earth as their own. And when they arrive here, they are benevolent. As a matter of fact, they're so benevolent there's nothing to fight about anymore. And they said that this actually kind of took the wind out of human society's sails, to where there was some sort of a degradation that occurred in society, because once we had all our answers given to us and we never had to struggle anymore for anything, it was that very struggle that led us forward to evolution. And so even by having beings like that here, while we might say they're doing us a service, some people might say they're doing us a disservice at the same time. So we have people out there right now, large audience. Okay, so 12.5 million believe that there's reptilian humanoids. I would say that 80% of them or 90% of them have heard all of the baloney out there and who are buying into it because it's entertaining, it's something different, they're listening to it, they're learning, they know passively they're learning things. But eventually what's going to happen here is that we're going to most likely be led into a conflict with reptilian humanoids. And then the outcome of the conflict will be our next Society 2.0. And it just seems to be that way because in past times when there's been great disasters on Earth, including the Great Plagues that wiped out Europe and China during the 1300s, at that time, when this occurred, there were beings that showed up. I know over in Avignon Palace, where the papacy had been reseated because of the conflicts in the Italian states, it was reseated in Avignon, France. There was, for 2 hours, a ball of light that hung over the palace there, and nobody could make it go away. And they had the same ball of light show up over Paris. Now, this actually was a report put out by a gentleman that wrote Footprints in Time, and he wrote all the school books for the American school system. And he said during that time in the 1300s, so many unusual things were going on, he was astonished that the other historians had completely neglected it. But you and I would see nowadays, okay, well, there's a UFO over the White House. Are they going to report it or are they not going to report it? How many children are alive today remember that some sort of alien or non-human entities were flying around the craft around the White House in 1952. This was a way to demonstrate that they had air superiority over us, over our most sensitive areas, the same way they did in World War II when the battle over Los Angeles happened. So once in a while, when we think we're the top dog on the planet, somebody comes along and slowly flies their ships. We shoot at them. We can't kill them. We can't shoot them down, and they can disappear. They're just showing us that they don't perceive us really as a threat. They're just watching us. And at some point in time, we're going to have to face the unity between our two species. And when we do, it's not going to be easy. There's always going to be racists out there. People who are like that even with humans. They don't like different skin colors, and they can beat a homosexual up and leave him by the side of the road or something, like crazy stuff like that. Human beings can be crazy. So that's never going to end. So it's not going to be pure heaven. Next. So right now, we've got 12.5 million people believing in this. So what the trend is telling me, since I started, is this is a trend that's going to be increasing as we go forward. Because as we go forward, the discussion of the reptilian part of ufology will get more and more and a wider and wider audience. And one of these days, if they pull open a ship and they see it has beaded skin like a lizard, or it has little suction cups on their fingertips, that will be the day that you guys have realized that you came into an awareness ahead of time, so you don't have to sit there in shock. You can be like, oh, well, we've heard this, done that, so you won't be the people that they're worried about. Because when they introduce extraterrestrial life, they're worried about a general panic. Go ahead. Go ahead. So our future, what does it hold? I mean, if we were to come in contact with these beings, okay, if they occupy the planet with us, are either one of us being pushed out of our environments? Is something happening underground where they'd suddenly have to flow forward to the surface? Is there anything happening on the surface to make us want to take refuge underground? What about things that would have to be decided is if you're a reptilian alien but you're living in under American soil, does that make you an American reptilian? Okay. We're not thinking of these things. There's political things that go on here. So, and even a matter of feeling like, okay, if the reptilians are taking underneath if they're living under the planet, are there just geologically distinguishable areas in which they're residing, which we're not supposed to go? Is there a border of some sort? These are all questions that are going to be answered in the future, as well as can we reproduce with them? Do they have music? Do they have poetry? All of these other things will be a learning experience. My personal belief is I wish we could get on with it, because right now we need something. We need something to give us a sense of greater than right before us. Right now we've lost sight with anything like that. There's nothing to tell us that there's a new region to be explored. Right? It wouldn't change a thing if they admitted that extraterrestrial life would admit. They could even admit to a small mouse-sized animal on another planet. That wouldn't really change things. But the old power in this world is slowly releasing or relinquishing power to a new power. This is where the lion and the unicorn, they fought before. The lion won the crown. The unicorn went underground. This is the Society 2.0 that we're hoping exists. The Arthurians that retreated underworld, the Celts, the other people like that we know that were civilized and peaceful. Where did they go? Hopefully it's at that point these groups will start to show themselves to us a little bit at a time. Although I don't think that there's going to be very many people around to see it. Because all you have to do is turn off the electricity in the United States, like the Department of Homeland Security has been saying recently, it could happen because of a solar flare, and there's millions dead within a month. So those kind of things will be happening in our future, and I'm not sure exactly how strong an event has to take place before it forces the hand of any of these beings from underneath to come look at us or even to try and make contact. So go ahead. As far as scientists, what do they think about human affairs and extraterrestrial influence, especially with the reptilian humanoids in this case? The Brookings report came out in 1962. Go ahead. And go ahead. And basically, some of the things they said in there is that anthropology has shown time and time again that lower cultures get devastated by a higher culture when they come into contact. This was repeated over and over again, it seemed like, in the Brookings report. And also, to the other point that most people overlook in the Brookings Institute report is the fact that they admit that the greatest part of society that's going to be damaged by contact with any kind of a higher being is the scientific and engineering fields. Now that means all of those guys who we're looking for approval from to admit that there's aliens are just by their own survival are not going to admit to it, because they realize if they admit to it, all of a sudden their careers get damaged. If there's a higher society coming in contact with us, all these scientists and engineers stop working and they go, wait a minute, let's wait until we can negotiate and find out what these guys have already discovered. And when there's really not that much for them to do anymore, they're worried about that because somebody else smarter has come along to give all the answers and not them. So go ahead. So here you have the anthropological files contain with samples of societies. This is their comment out of the report. Next. Now, when you look at who made the comment, this is a cursory investigation. I only got this information like 2 days ago. I put it together, but it shows how this old documentation, when you start pulling some names out and you start doing background checks on some of these people who were otherwise just normal scientists, you find out they weren't. So this gal that said this, the contributing anthropologist for the Brookings report, Cora Dubois, she was professor of Department of Anthropology at Harvard University. But there's also something else about her. Go ahead. It turns out, go ahead. that she was also a high senior officer in the OSS, in the military intelligence. And during World War II, she headed up a division of analysis and research for special research for Southeast Asia. After that, she continued on her same course with Southeast Asia as a perspective, but she became more and more important, and she eventually reached a position, even inside the State Department, where she was operating their Bureau of Intelligence and Research. So this is somebody that's a spy. This isn't a normal anthropologist. So when she's up there saying, no, it's going to be devastating, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, it's going to be really bad, these are the kind of people they solicited to make the report because they knew ahead of time what their personal feelings were about the issues. And that's, you wouldn't make a report and let it just go, you know, throw the dice to the wind and let the scientists write what they want. That's just not how it happens. As a matter of fact, the bookings report, I think, was 2 or 3 times stopped, and then everybody had to reanalyze where it was headed, and they'd have big meetings about where the report was going and how to continue it. Go ahead. Back up. So, oh, you can't back up. You can. Okay, so it says here, it's been speculated that of all groups, scientists and engineers might be the most devastated by the discovery of relatively superior creatures. There it is. There's the main reason you're not being told the truth. Because all these guys that build the computers, that build the airplanes, that build the buildings, all of these people that we say are the constructors of our society wouldn't want to participate because they would be economically damaged. Go ahead. So what would that do to their world of science? Go ahead. It would basically turn their world of science upside down, and they're not going to put up with it. No matter what they think the sociological or the emotional repair and good this would do for us all to learn that we're not alone on our planet. Go ahead. So what are the ramifications for public disclosure, guys? Because I've certainly been out there over the years, and I know other people have too. Let's see what we got. Go ahead. DARPA. DARPA is the one organization on this planet that is in charge of almost all UFO stuff. Okay, and over the last, I think, 3 or 4 years, no, 6 years, I think they've changed their name from ARPA to DARPA, back to ARPA, back to DARPA, back to ARPA, then back to DARPA. And the only difference is they were leaving the D for defense off it. Okay? ARPA is like a main body of science that decides where we're headed, and what they say goes. And they, for example, the internet was the ARPANET at first. It was developed by the defense industry to have secure communications. Then when they realized that they could monitor everybody, that's when it became the internet. So when every time you get on the internet, you're actually opening a door to something that the defense industry built, and they operate everything. And when you operate information and you're in control of information, you're in control of everything. So this one group is the one group that you should be looking at very carefully. Go ahead. So with the men in black, next. Let me see where I am. Oh, you know, part of my description of what I was going to tell you tonight is about intimidation. Here is the pictures of my flight, my boarding pass, and a jury summons. And what this is about, when I was on the Conspiracy Zone twice, Kevin Nealon and the producer once came in, and I had a talk with them in the green room. And they had said to me in confidence at that time, John, did you know that everybody we've had on our show talking about extraterrestrial stuff, almost everybody has come back to us saying that when they get back home after doing the interviews, they have a jury summons in their mailbox. Okay, so when I got back home, sure enough, I had a jury summons in my mailbox. Now, to the producers, this is a way of saying we're watching you, because they know that all of their talent or all of the guests are going to say, I'm not sure I can do the interview, I've got a jury summons. When they know that somebody is going into interstate communications and they're going into secured networks, okay, when your number comes up for jury summons, this is all supposed to be calculated by state computers on a random thing, and nobody's supposed to have access to those. So when everybody who is a guest talks about UFOs, all of a sudden somebody's pointing out to the producers and letting the producers know that we're watching everything that's going on here. These are the implied threats that television production get. There are other things that I think there's been two TV shows that when I went on, they closed down. I remember Dan Aykroyd had a show for a short period of time that didn't even make it to broadcast. The same day I was interviewed, John Mack was. And it was only about 2 weeks after that they canceled the show and never let it get off the air. Well, Dan has a vested interest in UFO production. His history and his family history go back to Canada, and what most people don't know is like Dan Aykroyd's mother used to be the secretary for A.V. Rowe. And A.V. Rowe was the guy that designed the small saucer-like craft that, up in Canada, and all of a sudden it went black. His father was involved in building underground bases up in Canada. Okay, I know Dan and his brother Peter, so you're not going to get these stories out of them because they don't talk about them much. So you have individuals out there who themselves have been trying to promote the UFO stuff, and even though they might feel that they're connected, they're also stymied. So what interview was it on the shows that didn't get aired? Who was saying what that they didn't want out? When it comes to intimidation like this with the Men in Black, has anybody heard, I don't want to repeat stories, but has anybody heard on Coast to Coast when I've talked about the Men in Black? Okay, I've met them on a couple occasions. One occasion I was talking to Steve about, I think, was when a friend of mine, I was doing some traveling around the Grand Canyon caverns, because after in 1909 when they discovered the large city in the Grand Canyon, and it was announced in the newspapers and the Smithsonian took over, I knew that there had to be other canyon-like cities in there, not just possibly one. I also know that the military likes to go on American Indian reservations and set up black operations because they don't have any state or government, federal government coming in and watching what they're doing or demanding, because they just go into private negotiations with the tribes. And so my reason for being down there was to look and see if there was another cavern or cave that tied in with the tunnel system down there so I could explore. A friend of mine who was actually, John Lear knows her, she was the part of the source for all of the Dulce information. I mean, all of it. Before John Lear, he wanted her to come out and start talking about it, and she didn't show up at the meeting, so John was there. John was there holding the mic with these reporters, and he had to blow the top off of Dulce for the first time. When I had heard from her, a colleague and I were going out there to drive out there, and we'd been out there for 3 days previous. She called us, and she's older, and she says, you know, I had a call here, and these guys threatened you, and they told me that if you go out there, you're going to end up in a cave, and it's going to be collapsed, or you're going to be hurting yourself. And I turned around, and on my drive there with my friend in the car, I was like, you know, she's great. She just wanted us to have such a good time. She made up this story to make us all feel, so excited. Men in Black, let's go. Let's, ramped it up. Because, we're thinking this can't be real. We get out there, and as we're pulling up, and this is only about half a mile away from the Grand Canyon Caverns off the highway where I'd pulled off before. And as soon as I get there, here's the car, sitting there, a black car, and there's two guys out there dressed in black, white shirts, black ties, the whole thing. And one is leaning against the car, and the other one gets up, and he starts walking towards us, and my friend Tony was in the car. I said, Tony, it's the Men in Black. And he goes, I see. And I go, come on, let's go talk to him. And he goes, I'm not getting out of here. This is all your fault. He was so... He knew what was happening, but he couldn't tighten up his stomach enough to get it back up on his feet and actually deal with these guys. And when I met them, only one spoke to me. He knew everything about me, and they were so nice. And my friend was right. They had such great care about my safety. They were telling me that I could get hurt, I could fall down, I could disappear. And one thing I've noticed when you're working with authority of any kind is just be nice and polite. And I was thanking them for their concerns. I was thanking them for their concerns. And then I left, and as I left, they were still standing behind us. Tony and I just got up and started walking away because that was our way of taking power for the moment. It was us who was going to decide to break away and walk away from the two men in black. It wasn't them that was going to leave. It was going to be us. And that was the one encounter I remember having. And these aren't alien guys. These are guys from like an underground base. Their car looked like it hadn't been driven. Like they took it out of the garage for the first time. Their shoes didn't have much dust on them. I remember one of them, the guy that was talking to me, kept licking a tooth like he had a toothache or something. So these were the little cues that made me realize this wasn't alien things. These are just human beings. The other time, I remember I was sleeping in a bed next to a window in Nevada, and I had a small Maltese dog, and he slept on the bed that was up against a window, so I had brought some of the curtain around so he had like a little area to lay in. He can kind of look outside and keep guard. He was a little Maltese cute. And in the middle of the night, I hear him growling, and I kind of wake up and I go, what are you doing? And at that time, I pulled back the curtain, and I could see somebody leaning down in the wheel well of my car, and they were doing something. This guy had a suit on, and I'm like, what is going on out there? And I'm looking at him, and all of a sudden, he just stands straight up. He doesn't face me. And then he walks directly to the back of the car, and another car pulls up behind him, and the door literally pops open by itself like it was pneumatically driven. So he didn't lift it open, just popped open like this. And the car inside had some sort of, I'm a pilot, so when I say advanced avionics, it wasn't a normal dashboard for a car, okay? And so those are the two times that I can recall seeing them physically. And at that point, even in my own house, I came to the realization, I said, how did that guy knew that I was watching him? Because he stopped what he was doing, like he stopped, and then just stood straight upright, like something had alerted him. And it was at that point I realized they must have a camera in my room. See? And then after that, I didn't do anything. People ask me, well, did you go digging around the wheel well of your car? No, I didn't. Why? Because I've dealt with these guys before. If you do that, if you find something, if you destroy it, whatever you might do, then they're going to do it again, and they just get a little nastier. This time they'll break a window, okay, because they can be malicious that way, because they're expecting, if you know you're being watched, for you not to give them a problem. So, one other time is... I heard about it as a friend of mine over in Colorado, in Wyoming. In Riverton, Wyoming, he had discovered that Riverton, Wyoming Airport is actually one of the entrance areas for transportation for alien craft. And when he found out that a government operation was going on and out of there, he... Being Weisenheimer, he contacts the Pentagon and asks them for an application so he could work there. So, and the next thing he knows, it was like the day or two later, all of a sudden he and his wife are picked up because their truck won't work. All of a sudden, another vehicle comes down by their rural area and stops, and the door pops open. So they thought, oh, good, we're getting a ride. And when they get in, it was two men in black. The one that was sitting in the back seat did not. My friend said he would turn to look at him, and his sunglasses were going around the side of his face more than normal, and he could see that they were covering up part of his eye. His actual eye socket went to the side of his head a little bit more than a normal person. And they were taken to the post office, and then they were asked, "Would you like us to come pick you up again?" And they said, "No, thank you. We'll walk home." And that was it. So these people are meeting individuals out there, and it's not always, it's interesting, it's not always like, we're going to kill you if you don't shut up. It's not like that. It's like an inference of, we're watching you, we know everything about you. That should be enough for you to get scared enough to stop doing what you're doing. And if you don't stop what they think you should stop doing, then they do get a little bit more difficult. So television shows get interrupted. Television shows like that. When we did the Men in Black TV show for the UFO hunters, they had a forensic artist come out and take descriptions of the people that we had met, the Men in Black. And then after we shot the show, about maybe 2 or 3 days later, I get a call from the producers. They asked me, do you have the illustrations the artist did of the individual that you described? And I said, no. And they go, well, we had it, and now we don't. It's not with any of our files. Nobody else's pictures are missing but yours. So I say to them, why don't you just put that into the show? I mean, obviously somebody got in there to take some illustrations out, and they're missing, and out of all of them. So why don't you just let your audience know that this thing occurred? Did you know that television shows are afraid to let you know things like that? They did not want the audience to know. Now, you would think that that would actually help make their show and provide more evidence that there's something going on. But as soon as it shows that they are personally connected with the subject matter or what's going on, they don't want it discussed. They don't want anything to do with it. And this is all part of the intimidation of the media. Does it happen? Yes. Does it happen overtly where people just say, you can't do this? No. It's more like nobody will be interested in that. And they'll say it 2 or 3 times to you. And each time they say it, they'll have a more stern look and voice to them. They just know some things just can't be shown. Especially when it comes to, these guys know that they're running millions of dollars in an operation through a production studio. And if they screw up anywhere along the lines, they know it's real easy. If those guys can get into the computers to change the roll call on jury summons, it would be real easy for them to be messed with. And so when you're thinking, is the media bringing us everything they have? No, they're not. You would think that they go, this is a UFO show. Wow, this is great. No, they don't. I've done enough of these shows over the years to know that. And you'd think that they would want to know just as much as we do, but they don't. They want to have their show boxed, canned. They want it in reruns. That's their whole focus. Go ahead. Yeah, I think it's the next clip, or you can try and play that clip. Or we'll have to get that loaded up. We might have to do the same thing to that clip. Wow, Steve, we had these all working before we started. Sorry for the interruption here. Good. I'm going to roll through here faster if I can get through this. Blowback. You can just double click that probably and play it. Okay. Is that a new slide, or is that? Okay. So we broadcast the show March 25th.
It is the most famous military institution in the world, and officially it did not exist. Is it possible, Steve? Officially, but you could find it about 100 miles outside of Las Vegas. And here on the launch pad, we can show you tucked between an Air Force base and an abandoned nuclear testing ground.
Okay. Maybe that'll work. Okay. Here's some of this shows when we did the UFO Hunters, and we talked about underground bases, and they invited me up beyond the show. I had to realize, what is it we want to tell people? Part of being in the media, which I've been in for a number of years, from both sides. I was producer, director, actor. One of the things is with the media is that when you go on shows, everything is plotted out and everything is planned as far as how your introduction is going to be. And just like I showed you before with Peter Van Sant doing this thing, totally unethical. Okay, because we're trained in the media, you're trained not to avoid those things, so you can't be charged with it. But when we did the UFO Hunters, I was asked, what do you want to present? Well, I know part of being in ufology is you get in front of the cameras, you don't just talk about aliens and green men. There's going to be something socially tied to it. One of the things about Dulce is that the more we promoted it and the fact that it was there, the more it drew it to the public's attention that human-animal hybridization and experiments like this were bound to happen. And unless ufology brought it up first, then it may not be easy for everybody to start getting the command of people up in Washington to start passing laws to protect us. Because that's one of the things that we found out clearly, is that people are taken off the streets and used in experimentation. It doesn't happen to the leaders' children. It doesn't happen to the elitist kids and their wives. It's just people like us. And when we did that with UFO hunters, I decided I wanted to bring the small mouse out with the human ear on it to show people how this kind of technology is taking place and to be careful that we don't have any problems regarding this. But also, the big part of the show was bringing out the RAND Corporation. RAND Corporation is down in Santa Monica. They were originally set up by the U.S. Air Force as an analysis think tank. Most people think they're just a private company, but no, they're not. Most of their money comes from the Air Force. So when UFO hunters wanted to know, John, what do you want to present? I said, look, these are publicly available documents. They're called, it was for high-speed trains, showing how that they had planned these maps across the United States. These things could travel 20,000 miles an hour, have you comfortably with no stress on the body, go from coast to coast in under 20 minutes. And where they had the stations, where they thought good places for stations would be, Denver was one of them. And they called back, not to RAND. RAND had to call the Pentagon and said, John Rhodes needs this information out of your catalogs for the show, and we would like to use it. And the Pentagon said, absolutely not. Even though these were public documents and you could buy them readily available even over the internet, they did not want the public to see it on TV. And so by showing this advanced technology like that out there, all of a sudden our government realized, okay, they needed to do something, because too much of a wide audience was getting told that underground bases are connected by tube shuttle systems to transport military personnel and goods. This is too close to the truth for them. They've been doing it for over 50 years. So what do? What we're seeing here now is blowback. This means that I did something and it's causing a problem for them. Now they need to kick back with counterintelligence operations. And one of the counterintelligence operations they did to kick back this, so we didn't take these things about underground bases and tunnels too seriously, is they had found a journalist who was on board an aircraft that had a Homeland Security exercise take place on it, and apparently the passengers were not notified. Well, this journalist started writing scathing articles about how terrible it was that the federal level could do this type of thing and scare people and everything, and then all of a sudden, the same person who's bitching like this is given the opportunity to have interviews with people that worked at Area 51, and she was allowed to be the first reporter ever to start writing a book with government approval. And here's her interviews. Okay, her first interviews. These are her first interviews, but listen to what she's saying, because even though her books are not about the tunnels and the underground bases, on both interviews, she's trying to make it very clear that that's not to have any kind of attention paid to it. It's not to be taken seriously. This is off subject even with her book, but she takes her very few minutes of airtime to make these comments. So have a look. Can we get that?
Yeah, about 100 miles outside of town, way out in Nevada's high desert area. It has become now the holy grail of conspiracy theorists, with all kinds of wild stories about UFOs. It was even referenced in the hit movie Independence Day. Area 51 was connected by a series of underground tunnels and trains to other secret facilities in that part of the country. But what's the real story?
It looks like the video isn't matching, but the track sounds probably good. Okay, something's going on with it.
Okay, it is one of the most famous military bases in the world, but the government won't even confirm that it exists. It's Area 51. It's about an hour northwest of Las Vegas. And now 5 employees breaking their silence about the clandestine facility. Author and investigative journalist Annie Jacobson wrote about the men for this week's LA Times magazine. This is fantastic, Annie. I'm so excited.
It's like old internet. You'll just have to look at these pictures.
Let me start with the fact that even Oprah Winfrey's employees have to sign a confidentiality. They can't tell anything that goes on in Harpo. So how is it that these employees are able to talk about Area 51?
She doesn't answer the question.
Well, I have the great fortune of working on a book for Little Brown about this exact subject, and I've been working with these gentlemen who I profile for the Los Angeles Times Magazine about their stories because the CIA has recently declassified one of the major programs that went on at Area 51 during the 1960s. It was called the A-12 Ox Cart. It was a plane that was so technologically advanced for its time. People often remember they're all black operations. They're classified top secret until the CIA declassifies what they want to declassify. And so many of those situations are actually spun from little bits of fact. I'll give you an example. A lot of UFOologists believe that Area 51 is connected to other military bases across the country by an underground tunnel. Well, for example, one of the radar experts that I interviewed, T.D. Barnes, he worked on a project next door to Area 51 that actually had a above-ground tunnel, but they all worked underground. So you can see, you can imagine sort of some guys at a bar in Vegas perhaps hearing a pinch of this and spinning it into a big story. Well, you know what? And the list goes on. Go ahead. You said the list goes on and on. I bet it does. Well, incredible get for you, Annie. Thank you very much. I can't wait to read much more of what they have to say in the future. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? There's a problem.
As you know, the nation is currently in a state of abject crisis. A recent study by the Board of Irresponsible People found that Americans were worried about, in descending order, the economy, healthcare, terrorism, mermaids, climate change, centaurs, catwomen, Iraq, North Korea, Spider-Man, man-cows, werewolves, Bigfoot, Sasquatches, and humanzees. A disturbing trend is emerging. Our number one story, but Senator Sam Brownback has stepped up to the plate and presented the Human-Animal Hybrid Prohibition Act of 2009. He has 20 Senate co-sponsors because apparently jackasses are still legal.
This was after the broadcast.
Presidential candidate introducing a bill that would ban the formation of part human, part animal creatures, which are created in laboratories and blur the line between species.
Which was addressed in the show.
Brownback trumpeting the bill via Twitter, Facebook, and his Senate blog. This legislation is both philosophical and practical, as it has a direct bearing upon the very essence of what it means to be human. Creating human-animal hybrids, which permanently alter the genetic makeup of an organism, will challenge the very definition of what it means to be human and is a violation of human dignity and a grave injustice. Another grave injustice, the bill has 20 co-sponsors, including one Democrat, Mary Landrieu of Louisiana. Perhaps worried that the island of Dr. Moreau was some sort of documentary or sick reality show on E! Landrieu is joined by Senator John McCain, his sidekick Lindsey Graham, who appeared in camera just perfectly there, as well as Senators Ensign and Coburn. Senator Coburn, of course, apparently had time, as did Senator Ensign, to support this bill on their way back from FedEx. This is the dream story. And we're joined now by comedian Christian Finnegan because Simon McCorkindale, the star of the old
saw
TV
the episode
Manimal,
because he refers to lizard people.
I've heard, I have it on good authority, that Tori Spelling is 1/4 ostrich. And if you've been around a South Florida retirement community, you can attest to large colonies of lizard people.
That's countdown for this, the 2,263rd day since the previous president, animal-human hybrids. The previous president declared mission accomplished in Iraq. I'm Keith Olbermann. I don't know what made me think of that. Good night. Good luck.
Obviously, we had a playing issue there with the computer playing that file. Well, it shows that even Washington was watching the show. It turns out that that particular episode of the UFO Hunters, and Bill brought this to my attention, was actually the one most watched show on the entire history of the History Channel at the time. Okay, that was a large audience. And obviously somebody paid attention because you have them in Washington suddenly bringing up the Human-Animal Prohibition Act of 2009, trying to make sure that American citizens don't get grabbed off their feet and have something like a chimpanzee DNA injected into you. Now, this is what we've been talking about in ufology for years. We knew this kind of testing and manipulation was going on. It's only now that we're starting to bring it up to the public's attention. When you're doing television shows, I think, and you're effective in speaking and making points, you may not be able to prove anything, but you certainly start generating conversation. And even starting to generate conversation in certain areas is something that our leadership and the manipulators just don't want. Next slide. We're going to move faster here. Okay, so we're going to get down here to South Bay Area. Go fast. Next. These are just mapping systems. I've got Google Earth, and over the years been plotting out where underground bases are and potential tunnels. So the Bay Area around here is on the west coast. We know we have these outer islands next. And we have Redondo Beach, Torrance, Manhattan Beach, Lawndale. All of this is aerospace. Okay. This is all DARPA in here. Okay? We've all been talking about UFOs for years, but we've never really talked about where the industrial center was. This is it. Out of everywhere else in the nation. You've got separate intelligence offices and separate factories and things like that going on, but it's right here where the heart of this is. Okay, this is where magic operates. Go ahead, next. During World War II, they know that they had German submarines alongside the beach. As a matter of fact, one was found off Redondo Beach after having been bombed for 2 days. It finally floated up on shore. So they knew that this was our area that was most insecure. And it stands that way today. That's why when you look up and down the west coast of the United States, there's large areas that have highway but no real towns. Have you noticed how like 99 on the east side of the mountains there isn't connected with any of that coastal region when it should be? They've purposefully kept a lot of these coastal regions free from human population. Go ahead. So that was it in 1942. Then we had the craft come down next. Next. The craft was seen coming down out of the Santa Monica Hills up towards Point Dume, like we were discussing earlier, and then hooking around a left, and it was flying over these areas specifically around Torrance, Redondo, and Long Beach. Okay, they're not flying over Pendleton. They're missing the airfields that are out there, so they're obviously not going to do anything. Whoever was flying at that time was not doing anything to immediately threaten our military installations, which is really interesting because they were sensitive to not going over a military installation during their flying. Next. Now, all of this area in here, one of the things that you'll notice is that, let's see, pull out and see if I got my laser pointer. Down on the south end of this photo of Redondo Beach, you'll see Palos Verdes jutting off to the right there. There's a large shelf that actually goes off the ocean there that's quite deep. And since that area contains most of our aerospace industries, it's a great place for submarines to come in and do listening of our sensitive communications there in that area. Go ahead, next. This is a picture. If you believe it or not, this is a picture from World War II. This is the Douglas Aircraft Factory. Go ahead. You can't see it from there. Next. But actually, in World War II, Douglas Aircraft got people from Hollywood out, and together with 20th Century Universal Studios and Warner, got out, and they took entire factories and they hid them underneath camouflage, in which on the top of the camouflage nets, they'd actually duplicated homes, street lights, cars, grass, fields, streets, everything. This was a top-notch Hollywood job. When you were overhead, it looked like a normal neighborhood. They had women that were paid to every day go out and move vehicles around just so it make it look like a normal neighborhood was operating. This is the way that we conducted clandestine operations during World War II. But after World War II, when all of this was on the surface, they realized that they were continue forward doing this kind of work, but they needed to get underground. Obviously, a flyover like that was not a very good thing to have happen. So go ahead. They started moving all of their stuff, more of this. You can see where this, it's looking there like a street is on your left-hand side, but that's actually tilted tarp. So they did everything, fake trees, fake homes, fake bushes, everything for a long distance. The entire what we know now as the Santa Monica Airport was this whole area up there. Go ahead. Go ahead. All fake. Next. Now they're telling us they can't hide underground bases from us. Oh, if you believe in underground base, well, you'd know it. No, you wouldn't. Next. Okay, this is something I found, strangely enough, this is an article out of Popular Mechanics magazine, 1920-something. Go ahead. And it talked about how the post office across the United States, all the post offices were originally built with secret passages. Every single one of them. And they said that some of these passages were up to 2 to 3 miles long. So the postmaster could come into the post office by walking through a 2-mile-long tunnel before he even reached the post office. And they actually had corridors with doors where the postmaster and his men could walk around like cameras do nowadays in the post office, but they would be spying on the employees from there. So when they talk about the air duct, the guy standing in the air ducts, this is government hiding in plain sight. It's really great. Go ahead. So what do we have off here? Between Palos Verdes, you have Catalina, and you know there's a great deal of UFO activity that takes place over those areas. And why Palos Verdes? Go ahead. Okay. Navy. Aerospace. There's a connection here, okay? Because Navy's always in charge of the UFO phenomenon. They need their high electronics, so they put their electronics manufacturing and research and development near where the Navy ships are. This is the area in which the craft are coming down before it took off. But here we have an area that is like a blind spot. Okay, so if any enemies were to come down, like the Japanese or anybody else, they'd come down the coastline and go to our naval base. So that makes this whole area here very sensitive. So actually what they've done is, years ago, they built Nike sites out there, Nike missile sites. Go ahead. And one of them on Palos Verdes used to be Marineland. Go ahead and have a microphone up there. Okay. I'm afraid to touch it here. So this is Marineland, as it used to look. Go ahead. And this is how it looks now. Okay. Terrania, is that how you spell it? Ternea. Okay. So this is a large on top of where Marineland used to be. I've spoken to people that worked security in this area while it was Marineland. Marineland had a dolphin research facility in it. Okay. And when Marineland was taken down, for many, many days, he was to watch over an area that had a small building, and they would come in and men would go up and down an elevator or stairs inside this thing deep down underneath there, and they were all military. So there's some sort of military base going. I think what's happened now is that this luxurious resort has turned into a West Coast Greenbrier hotel. Because you have everybody from the aerospace industries here that would be coming in, and if they needed to go somewhere close by, they would go to the PV resort and then go down into the tunnel systems here to make it back over into Torrance. Okay, because what happens is you've got all the big engineers over in Torrance that are involved in research and development for aviation and space. This is the luxury area. This is the area in which this individual who was a guard here for many years, his father grew up. As a matter of fact, go ahead. All in this area, I used to know a lot of people that worked here. Security, kids of people that were in aerospace. Next. Next. We've currently got activities going on that include cavitation flight. Now, cavitation flight is that how many people are aware that Iran right now has torpedoes, like submarine torpedoes, but we've seen them in the movies. These submarine torpedoes are really kind of slow. Okay, Iran got from China, and the United States has already developed something called cavitation torpedoes, which creates a gas bubble flow at the tip of the nose of the torpedo, so it's able to fly through the water. Instead of reaching speeds of 60 miles an hour, they now have torpedoes that go 300 to 400 miles an hour that are faster than anything unbelievable in the oceans. When you can reach speeds like that, I think China last month or the month before announced that they're developing plans to have a submarine that can travel in excess of 2,000 miles an hour. This is through cavitation technologies. When you have something going that fast underwater, when it leaves the water, it just has to eject little wings out. And being a pilot, I know if you're traveling at high speeds, that's enough to start flying. And then when you go back in the water, pull your wings back in, and you can just drop right into the water like a dart. This is the future of our Navy. It's extreme high-speed travel using cavitation. So we believe that they're doing cavitation testing off here. This, by the way, is from my favorite show when I was a kid. Seaview was the name of the show. Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, right. Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. Where the craft come, remember they had all these animals and monsters. They had underwater caves. It was a great show. It also dates us. So, yeah, this was being talked about back then. Now we know they probably have flying craft quickly exiting the water and traveling into the water. Go ahead. This I put under there is because this was 1934. This is when Warren Shufelt, who was an engineer in Los Angeles, had said that he was told by the Hopi Indians that there was a city underneath Los Angeles called Lizard City, and it was from where the Hopi elders and the ancients a long time ago had established a large network of caverns and tunnels in the Los Angeles area. And Warren felt that he had devised a radio device that could find tunnels, almost like, I think you would say X-ray or MRI nowadays. Go ahead. And the tunnel system is around Los Angeles. Well, right now, we have buildings and all kinds of stuff over that now, so there's no way for us to even explore in this area to find out what's there. Although I'll tell you, in the course of this, putting this together, I had come across newspapers.com. If you ever get into that, they have scanned all newspapers throughout time, like thousands, and it does word searches. So you can go into old newspapers and type in certain words or phrases, and it'll look through all of the newspapers' articles, and it'll pull up the results. I pulled up results of, like, Chicago announcing a discovery that found giant mummies inside an ancient cavern system that had all these tunnels in it. Stories like the Grand Canyon, but these are in old newspapers that we never read anymore, and we're generations that have passed, we haven't seen it. Go ahead. Yeah, and it's like $60 for a full year, and you can use it in research all you want. And all it is, you just have to be creative with your word strings that you put in. Okay, and some of these areas where they say they're closed down, they're not actually closed down. I'll go to some areas that on the coastline where they say it's a closed nuclear site. As you can see here, go ahead. First thing I noticed when we're here is, go ahead. They have the door all sealed up next. Now, my thing is that everything's rusting, yet they have a plastic picnic table outside the door. Now, that doesn't make sense to me, see? A wood, I can't tell you the exact location. I could, but one of the reasons I think I'm not dead yet is because I don't give an exact location. Okay? Well, I'm just trying to be safe. You know, I have to pick my battles. So, and in this case, yeah, it's federal property. I shouldn't have been there. Next picture will show you why. Because that door, behind that door, even though this is abandoned, this is the interior of the hallway. Okay, this hasn't been shut down for 40 years. The plastic picnic table tells you right there somebody's coming up and taking a break. Outside the front doors, they had large 10-inch diameter cable sections that had been pulled out of the ground and cut and frayed open. But then I said to my friend, I was there at the time, I said, now that's kind of stupid. They would just put it down on the ground. It's a Hollywood thing. They want you to think it's no longer functioning, so they bury cables and they pull up the ends and make them look like they cut the lines. It's all been like a Hollywood set. They're very perfect at doing this. So here we have, obviously you can see that people are inside this facility currently. It may be one of the upper stages where the guards go up and take a break or something like that up near the surface. But this is not far from homes, and when they tell these facilities are so sensitive that they're still running black operations out of these facilities because they can't abandon them because they overlook the west coast of the United States where all of the Russian ships or Chinese ships or Japanese ships, any of these other shipping lanes might come in. Go ahead. Go ahead. And go ahead. Oh, yeah, okay. So, okay, Majestic 12. After the name of the men who met in Paris at the Hotel Majestic a long time ago that decided, I think in '53, they were going to go ahead and they were going to control everything to do with UFOs. Now, the word majestic is something, and magic is something that's very sensitive in cryptography, not cryptozoological, cryptography. In World War II, there was something called magic. Magic was such a sensitive code word and names to be using that the men being delivered magic messages, they would receive a messenger. The messenger would not allow that person to leave and would not allow them to keep the paper with the note on it. They would have to take the note back to where they came from. Okay. In other words, people even in the operations were not allowed to even keep evidence that they were communicating with anybody. So when they talk about magic and the Majestic 12, they play along these words. I've been doing this long enough where there's this thing called it's like a nod and wink. It's like I'm in the secret agency and I'm going to put something down here which only the people in the secret agency know. They know if I put 3 full stops, it means something. So they'll do that, and because they know that the readers out there that are actually like themselves will look at it and go, ha ha, I know, I get it. The wink and nod thing. It's a pride thing. They do it all the time. So DARPA's down there in the South Bay area, and then we come up with this one company, and I'll use this as an example, Magnavox. Okay, Magnavox, I think Magnavox was started in 1908. During World War II, they had received 3 EEE awards for excellence because they were in designing naval communications. Magnavox, next. Really? Next? That's it, okay. Oh, how interesting, okay. That doesn't seem even real. There's got to be more slides on there. Okay. There you go, thank you. No, I'll just tell you right off the bat because we're missing some slides here and I don't know why. If we can go back, because they're important. That's forward. 1937, showing an underground base with aircraft. Okay, something's going on here. Yeah, it is skipping around. Okay, no, we'll just stop. Okay, the thing about Magnavox is this. Magnavox developed GPS. It also developed the CD. Okay? It also, the people in charge at Magnavox, Arthur Stern, was said to be one of the earliest people working on the transistor, which we have suspected was taken maybe off a Roswell crash and back engineered. Magnavox was one of the largest companies for back engineering alien devices. As a matter of fact, Magnavox has its name as Magnavox Advanced Government Industrial Company. Magic. Okay? Or Magnavox Advanced Government Electronics Industrial Company. Magic. They're all doing these same things with the names over and over again. Magic, as a matter of fact, Magnavox developed the very first fax machine. And they used it during the earthquake in Alaska. They had sent the transmission of the first damage from the earthquake in the Alaska earthquake over that. So Magic is Magnavox is one of the main companies in the back engineering of everything that we've seen come off the craft. I know this because somebody I knew, father, they worked in Magnavox. They had seen color TV that was 3D color TV, high definition in 1962 in an underground base, and they're still sad to this very day they haven't lived long enough to see them do the no glasses 3D HD. So that's how far back our technology is being drawn back. And see, I have a problem with that because, yeah, they've slowed down our progress. They've gotten us used to, as a species, to be wanting to update and new things all the time. Yet at the same time, they're not even taking us off conventional oil for power. They've got all these things that they've been holding back for so many years from us. So I'm going to start wrapping this up because I could go on forever and we are running out of time. I'd like to field some questions from anybody out there that might have some. Okay. Go ahead.
Wow, I was trying to remember all these things. Thanks. Just going back to the just a few minutes ago, you were talking about this new, the new little things that are going in and out of the water so fast. That was news to me. I had no idea. Okay, and so I'm wondering, all these stories about people seeing these little flying things coming out of the water at incredible speeds, is that ours? And also, I think you alluded to the fact that the reason they could go so fast, I forget, but they notice that when they come out, there's like no splashing. They're just going zoom, you know, and they're also seeing things under the water that are going really fast. So find that fascinating. Going back a little bit further, so I'll be fast. We talked about, you know, how the government decides to bump off this person or that. I'm really wondering how Linda Moulton Howe is still walking the earth, and Stanton Friedman, and it's just interesting because if anybody should have been gone by now, it should have been her.
I'll just add something to that. Here's people coming from the South Bay area that you may not know of. Myself, Sean David Morton, who I don't have too much to say about. Stanton Friedman, as a matter of fact, gave one of his first lectures at El Camino College. But Stanton's lectures really haven't changed that much. He's still using the same title for his lecture over the same years. So, and Linda Moulton Howe's like, she's never still enough to focus on any one area to become an expert in it. She's a reporter on many different things, so she doesn't pose a threat. If you're posing a threat, you're focused on one particular thing that they want sensitive, and you're drilling away at it and digging away at it. That's what they don't like.
But she was drilling away at the calculations for years.
Yes, absolutely she was. And then other people...
That's what she started with. She's
right.
from Idaho, Boise, Idaho, and that's where she really got
right, and then other people got involved. But
plus her father's a pilot and friend of Ken Arnold's.
Right.
Her father's
so there was a natural interest in there, right.
Very from the beginning.
Right.
Can I ask you about the underground bases?
Just one more thing.
Okay.
That was interesting. You were talking about different people, you know, that had problems, and you were saying how the only reason that you're still alive, blah blah blah, and we know that different people have been murdered. But the one person I'm thinking of on Art Bell that was the big mystery, is why he the air and totally disappeared. And
what's the question? So,
yeah, why did he go up air? Did somebody threaten him?
You'd have to ask George. I think George has been on and off the air like 6 or 7 times. So, you know, I think he's retired like 4 times, right?
But it was very mysterious.
Art Bell. Yeah. Art Bell retired like 4 times, right?
He's just gone.
Yeah. I don't know. Hold on a second.
Talking about underground bases, what do you find credible along those lines? I understand there's between 150 and 200 deep underground bases in this country. I was wondering what you know, or what you think is credible underneath the sea and even the furthest corner.
There was a report put out by a writer wrote a book, and I think it was Gary Zukov, wrote a book about World War III. He had said that when he got the transcripts from General Altunin of the Soviet Civil Defense Command over in the Soviet Union, when he was asking for more money to build more underground protections, at that time he had made the statement that the United States already had enough underground space to house over 100 million people. He was claiming that the United States had already made facilities for over 100 million strong underground.
Where
he didn't say.
And when did this general say that? When did he say
I think this was in the 1980s. This is when we were ramping up against the Soviet Union. No, even if it's not 100 million people, if you just take a fraction of that and say 1 million people.
What do you find credible?
Well, I don't know. I can tell you one thing, though. I do.
You know, some of this is credible.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, no. Here's something. When you're a general and you have to go down to an underground base, who's going to wash the dishes? Not the general. So they need an entire support structure. It has been hypothesized by some of us in the research community that a long time ago, not only did they set up their own structure, but they started to actually occupy it. Not only is there a hidden government, but there's also hidden civilization underneath our very feet.
Like the Greenbrier Hotel, like Cheyenne Mountain.
Well, Greenbrier, it was empty when they got there. They only had the television service that was actually maintaining the base. Cheyenne Mountain right now, they say is deactivated, but we know it's not. Nothing's ever really deactivated. When they show us the Greenbrier Hotel, then you've got to say, well, what does that mean? Where were they keeping our leaders now? It's because it's the underground space that's actually being occupied is not the pipes overhead with the concrete floors and the narrow hallways. This is not how it's done. A long time ago, Hollywood got connected with the government, and just like within Disneyland, they went down into the basements, into these underground facilities, and they started reproducing them as you would up on Disneyland to make it more enjoyable to be around instead of a dark, dungy feeling like constantly underground. And for a lot of these people, they'll take 5, 10-year contracts or 15-year contracts, and when they do that to go underground, they're signed up with big bonuses, but then you can't stop them from having a family. So we believe that they have paired people up, or they've gone underground on long-term contracts and may actually have children living underground with them right now.
Now, I've heard Dulce associated with reptilians. I've heard that the royal family, the Windsors, are actually shapeshifting reptilians. And this is a... That's my question. Thank you. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And she even said at one time, you know, Princess Diana said they're not even human, you know, according to whatever that meant. And I've had some association with them in Antarctica, alleged underground bases, a living potential there, up in the Arctic. And I'm
Speak into the mic and don't shake it. Yeah.
And after all is said and done on this, where are the reptilians? I mean, are there? I've heard that some are coming and going from space, and I've heard that there are many living here, and I think that's a credible case. And I'm wondering, where would you say they live?
Where would they live?
Where do they live?
I think that they may actually have a higher population density inside the borders of the United States. I mean, when you look back through time, you can see historians notably said that the United States was filled with serpents. Now, this wasn't only because the Algonquin and the other native tribes here had all been surrounded by the serpent image for hundreds of years. This is what their gods were like. Even Madame Blavatsky, the theosophist, had said that the United States was called Patala. And this is where the serpent land was. Amaruca is Peruvian, meaning land of feathered snake. Okay, this is where they had created their entire civilization was in here, and then we came in and we kicked them out saying they were savages, and they weren't savages at all.
I think there's a good case that there have been aliens in the southwestern U.S.
Most definitely.
Northern Mexico, in this part of the world for quite some time, and now all of a sudden there's a dense human population here.
On the West Coast specifically.
Coming in contact.
Right. And we're seeing more. We have more cameras, and more people are opened up to it. Remember, even for you to go looking for something, you have to have a slight belief in it in the first place to even just start staring at in the direction of looking for it.
Okay, down here in the Southwest, we've got reptilian natives. Who else?
Who else? You mean what other species?
Where else do you think they may be?
All over the planet, just in geologically remote areas. I mean, I know here in the United States, where I've been talking to a lot of people, I know what their feelings are, where they're from, but we still have reptilian contacts happening in other countries, specifically like Italy. Okay, they're having a lot of reptilian humanoid contacts and sightings over there as well. So, and the conversation is blossoming over there as far as that's concerned. But you can't ever say where are they exactly. I mean, it's like saying where's there an underground base? We're just not sure. We know that you're right, the desert Southwest has a heavy population of some other type of non-human entities occupying this region here.
The lizard people, the ant people,
well, the greys are the ant people, the lizard people are the snake people, or the reptilians. And a personal friend of mine was Thomas Benyakia. Thomas Benyakia was the chief of the Hopi. But even he said to me that not enough of the Hopi that are alive today even believe the stories that he was trying to tell them as real. In other words, they'll hear of Snake Man and they'll think, oh, Grandpa's just thinking about the snake spirit or this, that, and the other. And he's like, no, I'm talking about snake person. And I actually had him sit across from me and Tony and tell us this. So I had some very... Once you get out of your chair and into your car and you go explore, you'll have wonderful things happen, but it doesn't happen at home. So I wouldn't have met the chief of the Hopi if I hadn't gone out there.
A quick comment and a question. The comment is simply, Gavin Mendes wrote a book, 1428, and it's the first example of an advanced civilization, in this case the Chinese civilization,
coming here, that's right,
doing technology transfer to the Venetians and sparking the Renaissance, and how that technology was closely held by the government and slowly diffused. So it's an early example. The question is, do you think that the aliens or the reptoids could be from a parallel universe where the asteroid didn't hit parallel Earth?
Okay, now it gets into the bit of speculation. From what I can gather, Earth a long time ago had a neighbor living on Mars, and something happened on Mars. The atmosphere was blown off, military-industrial complex survived because they were underground. The survivors came to Earth. The survivors were pure man, not mankind like us, half monkey, half man, but we're pure man. And because they were refugees from a planet that had a problem on it, the agreement was made between the reptoids and them that they could occupy the top part of the planet and leave the reptoids alone underground. But what happened is when they came up to our planet, they needed to take monkey men, and they needed some slaves to go out there and work the fields because they were gods. It was below them. They were leaders. It was below them. They don't do that. So what they did is they started taking some of us and genetically manipulating us to a slave race. Then all of a sudden, some of these really cool reptilian guys underneath, probably some reptilian hippies or something, said, oh, this ain't no good. These guys are kind of like nicer than that. They deserve a little bit more. And what they did was they came up, and the theory is that they gave an early group like that, like Adam and Eve group, they gave them some sort of psilocybin, some sort of psychoactive drug. And what this did, that it allowed them a different perception on who they were and their place on the planet. And when they came out of it, they were forever changed. This is why God came down and said, where are you? I can't see you. You've done something different. Now, there was a disagreement then because they weren't supposed to have done that. So they were forced into the bottomless pit, which is actually tunnel systems under the planet. They're not supposed to come up. And it said that God said, I will make an enmity between you and the woman and between your seed and her seed. In other words, I'm going to make sure humans and reptoids don't get along. Okay? I'm going to foster a fear of each other because I don't want you having anything with each other right now. And what happened was that the serpent people went underground and we started occupying the surface of the planet. But now, what does that leave us? Because we're still in the middle of some sort of a conflict between the reptilians and these Mars-based men. Now, some of them, you might call them angels, because they're suddenly appearing, they've got a halo around them, they're acting like they're benevolent, wonderful teachers, and some people might say that's an angel, whereas in the other guy it's a lizard man. But we've known they've been having these conflicts and things that they've been fighting over. They're afraid of us gaining our own independence by saying, screw both of you. Anunnaki is just another for the reptilian humanoids. Don't get caught up in all the terms, because what happens is you'll get speakers that'll come along that'll try and coin a word that they hope to popularize so it makes them more prevalent in the UFO field, like a speaker. Oh, we're going to talk about the Anunnaki. So the words just get kind of confusing. Go ahead. Okay, you're welcome. RH negatives. 5% of the global population has RH negative blood. 15% of it is up in Norway and Sweden and Scotland and England. And we've said that time and time again, there's some sort of a special interest the reptilians have in RH negative bloodlines. And I think it was the Starseed book when it first came out and started addressing Rh negatives, Brad Steiger. Okay, there's something about this. It's true. There's something very interesting about it. Now remember, for Rh negative blood, it means that you don't have a specific protein on the surface of your red blood cell. Everybody else does. Okay? That means whatever was floating around in the air that got into people's bodies that made them that way, the Rh negative people weren't there. They were taken underneath the planet during a time of devastation, and then when they came back later up, they didn't have this deformation in their cell. And when they came up, they were not normal. They had problems with their blood being too anemic and everything, and they started being called blue bloods because they were intelligent people, but they were constantly sick. And this is what has been carried into this whole thing about the blue bloods and the reptilian queens and all this. Just, it's crazy stuff. And I'm not saying none of it's real. I'm saying 85% of that is all just whacked out crazy talk. Okay? If there's going to be hybrids everywhere, not just in royal families, but all the talk is about hybrids on royal families. And it's just not that way. With Rh negative bloodlines, we've also discovered that they seem to be more easily adapted for living in a polluted environment. This protein, the surface of the cell, allows transport between carbon in and out of the blood walls, and it seems like Rh negatives are healthier, and also they might be carrying a larger negative ion field around them. In other words, their own body is producing more of a negative ion field, so therefore germs that are floating through the air don't attach themselves to you, they're more repelled away from you. See, so in other words, they're healthier than most people. And there's many other things, the red hair, the extra vertebrae, the back pain, the different things that go along that heightened sensitivity to electronics. But they play a big part in what's happening. And there's either Rh negatives or there's Rh negatives and their helpers. See? Even if you're not Rh negative, because blood has been known to change factor. So you can be positive one test and negative in the next.
But they're telling everybody they're positive now, even if you're negative. That's another thing.
Yeah, but see, you can't really do that, because then you lead a person down to a dangerous position, because then with having babies it can introduce problems.
I understand that, but
right.
Now they're telling all the kids now they're all positive.
Well, they tell all these children, you never had a tail.
Right.
Okay, I know people today that had their tail cut off. Okay, and it happens a lot. Happens a lot. They don't like to hear that in church. You know, you had a tail we had to have cut off. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you, by the way.
Hi.
I wanted to ask you 3 different questions. One, just to get clear, so the Illuminati, the Anunnaki, and the Reptilians are all the same?
Anunnaki is another term for a reptilian.
And the Illuminati?
Illuminati is just a special group of people that feel that they're special, and they feel that they have more information and more power, and they're in that brotherhood. Okay. In other words, you've been entered into a brotherhood. I'm sure there's a ritual they probably have to go through, like riding a donkey naked backwards. Who knows?
So it's not connected, really. It's not connected to.
Well, they are. The Illuminati are people who know about things like this. Not all of them sit there and go, "Oh, I'm an Illuminati and I'm naughty and I'm evil and everything." That's not the way it is. But I'm sure there are some people who are Illuminati that are involved in exposing what's going on. But there may be some that are trying to keep it a secret.
Okay. And then another question I had is, I was out at the Los Angeles forest. And with a friend, and at about 11 o'clock at night I saw tons of activity in the sky, like crazy amounts of different ships in the sky. And I was wondering if that was an area that you've heard about.
Where was this again?
The Los Angeles forest. It's out by, it's like you take PCH, you just keep going down, and it's amazing.
I know that between here and San Francisco, there's a whole bunch of empty space up there. Yeah. There's entire mountain ranges that have no roads in them and everything. So who knows what in the world is going on out there? What I do know is that, at least where I'm in, I came from Fresno, he said, but actually I'm in Mariposa, so it's one of the gateway entrances to the Yosemite National Park.
Right.
But we have the craft coming there all the time too, but we also have secret facilities that are involved in R&D up there. And the locals don't talk about them because people have jobs there. So the locals don't talk about these places. But I personally have seen the triangle craft come down low over there.
Yeah.
And due east of us is Area 51. And what happens is that Area 51 releases their jet fighters, and because my dad was a fighter pilot, I'm a pilot, when you're flying, when you're learning to fly as a pilot, you go in and out of mountains. You never want to get caught over the ocean or over a desert where it's nice and flat, because radar will pick you up. So what they do is they fly their exotic flight platforms due west, and they intersect Yosemite National Park and the southern entrances to the southern Sierras. And we have backup facilities, radar facilities up there using our most advanced radar being built down on the valley floor, the electronic floor down there. And they're looking for their own aircraft coming in for Area 51, while the Area 51 aircraft are trying to evade detection. This is how war games work. In other words, you'll play both sides. And so we've got these people up in the mountains setting up radars, and then we have the flight aircraft coming in. And if they're not coming in for specifically games like that, they're coming in because they're doing pickup flights where they'll go over one sensitive facility to another, and they'll pick up, like a transporter, they'll pick up items.
Yeah, because there were so many different ships, so many different kinds. And there was one that was so beautiful. It kind of sounded like it was a triangle one. It had all these different colors moving around it, and it's stunning. Like that's the one I wanted to go on. And then my last question is about the reptilians. Would you say that it's possible that they could just be literally people that you know, not just people that are underground so much, but people that you could actually, they could be very
human.
Human.
Yeah.
So what are some of the distinctions, for instance, like what are some of the signs of it being a humanoid? To, is it in the skin? Is it? Well, I don't think it's going to be anything that's too easily distinguishable. I mean, that's the whole case about them looking human. All I know is that when some people feel that they see a reptilian humanoid, okay, there's something called eidetic memory. Eidetic memory is what we had as children. You could be sitting down at the toy set, and you'd be focused on it so much and so into it that in your mind you actually see the little people running around or the little toys come to life and things like that. That's called eidetic memory. Okay? That is actually part of your brain putting an overlay over your visual field. It's happening in your head, but you're seeing it in your eyes. And so there are some people, when you're around them, you get super sensitive and you go, that person's not nice. And for a split second you look at them and they turn into a reptilian. Yeah. Okay? And that's your own subconscious brain saying, stay away from that person. Yeah. Does that mean that that person was a reptilian humanoid? No. Right. This is where it becomes difficult because everybody's running off going, oh, shapeshifters, they're all shapeshifters. I say I'm changed. I say I'm changed. Everybody saw I'm changed. It happened right in front of us. Well, in multiple eyewitnesses, it can happen. I remember getting off the show with George Norrie or Art Bell a long time ago, and somebody called me up and they go, hey, Mr. Rhodes, how are you doing? I was like, good. And they go, oh, I just thought we'd like to call you because I have friends of mine. We're all deadheads. We follow the dead. And I go, oh, yeah, really? That's cool. Oh, yeah, well, I don't have a phone. I'm making a phone call from the payphone. I said, okay, what is it we'd like to know? And he goes, we wanted you to know that a lot of times when we're imbibed, there will be like 2 or 3 of us that will see one of these creatures walk right past us. But we're all seeing him at the same time. Okay? Human brain is an interesting thing. Yeah. It can actually make you see things that aren't there, but it also allows you to see things that most people don't. It's like the craft. Have you heard of reports where people said, I saw a UFO, but somebody standing over there didn't see it? Yeah. But it was really big? It's because somebody on that craft wants you to see it, so they're, like a tuning fork, they're getting your perceptual wavelengths tuned in with them so they can be seen, whereas others can't. So when you're talking about shape-shifting, you won't hear very many speakers get into the details like this because it does throw some accounts into question. And a lot of speakers don't want people to not like them, so they want to appeal to what those people want to hear. And
say, no, some of these contacts and sightings are real and some of them aren't. But I don't want to give you any BS by saying, yeah, they're all real. Okay, because it has to do with you just as much as it has to do with the other person. Because, see, your senses are much more acute than you're being led to believe. Most of us. They don't want our senses. It's pollution. You know, if you go away from town for a while, you'll notice that your senses, your smell becomes more acute. It's because you have less pollution molecules sticking to your nose and stuff up there. It's blocking all that. But when you get away from it, you have much more clarity.